All right, let's talk about small groups for a minute at KidZone. Now, these are going to be a little bit different than if you've been in an adult small group before and how those things run. We typically will have 2 small group sessions in each service, okay? This is, again, going with the classical style that we would typically go with the service. Now, for whatever reason, if your service is different or you're limited to 1, you'll want to ask your service coordinator, well, which type of session should I use, okay? And I want to tell you, on the manual that's up above here on the page, you'll see there's actually a page that specifically talks about small group questions. And that's what I have right here in front of me that I'm going to read from just to kind of go through and talk about it, what we should be going through. Okay, so let's start first with session 1. Okay, you can see right here, all right, we just have some basic things that you can do. Number 1, just go around and ask everybody their name. Now, if you obviously know everybody, you know that everybody else knows each other, don't do this. But if you even see one person that's new, just go around and ask everybody, all right, let's all say our names, okay? So that nobody feels weird and nobody feels like they don't know me or who are they going to call on, okay? You want to make sure that everybody knows each other's name, okay? Now ask basic questions. In this first session, you really want to just get everybody comfortable talking. Now, some of your kids are going to be like, immediately like, oh yeah, I can talk all the time. But you probably have some other ones that are like, I don't know that I want to say anything. And that is why you ask basic questions. Basic questions enable you to be able to really get some kids talking. See, trying to ask some question immediately, like saying like, now in the story, who did the right thing and who did the bad thing? Kid might feel a lot of pressure with that of, I don't know that I know the right answer. But if you ask a kid just point blank, what is your favorite type of candy? Well, they'll know that because that's about themselves. They can say that. They're okay with even saying that because there's no right and there's no wrong answer. That's a basic question that you want to ask. Now, here's the thing. During that first group, you want to make sure that they're respectful of each other. Because again, you have some kids that are super talkative, some that aren't. You want to balance that out so that everybody has some talking time. Make sure that that is respectful. And the last thing you can do in that group is you can play a game. For some kids, that's honestly going to be the only way that just kind of breaks them out of their shell. Something that's like Duck Duck Goose, 7-Up. There's tons of things you can do, or maybe you even have some special toys at your campus, like a box of Legos or a Slinky, something else like that. There are tons of different things you can do in small groups, but try to think through what exactly do we need to do, whether those games need to be social distanced or non-touch. There's tons of different things you need to consider whenever you're leading a small group. But that's the first thing you need to think about with session 1, okay? So at the very beginning of the service, right after that game, you're like, all right, we're going to small groups. Session 2, what do I do? Because session 2 is where we want to focus a little bit more on the story. Because remember, we have the story, and then in the progression, session 2 comes right after. So session 1's at the very beginning of service, session 2's at the very end. So what are we doing with that second session? Well, let's go through our questions. First question I want to ask, what happened in the story? I'm not asking for them to tell me the entire story again. Some of your kids will try. But just like, what happened in the story? Like if I talked about like Daniel in the lion's den, and I asked like, what happened in the story? Those kids are going to be like, yeah, the lions didn't eat Daniel. Okay, well, that wasn't the whole story, but really, like, are they talking about the climax of the story, the big moment, the thing where God performed a miracle or something like that? That's what you want to hear. Did you at least hear the story to know what was going on, okay? So that's kind of question 1 you want to ask. Question 2, who is in the story and what did they do? You really want to focus in, did they pick up the main characters? Okay, so again, Daniel, that's a main character. You want to make sure that they get the king. Did they get that? Did they get all the advisors who were being all manipulative in that story? Did they get all those characters, okay? And you can help them out with that by just asking some questions depending on how the story was told, whether or not there were characters of, hey, who was wearing this or who said that? Or depending on your age group, you might need to push it a little bit more and give some hints. But you want to ask who was in the story. That's going to really jog their memory immediately into what just happened in that story. Question number 3, what was the lesson in the story or the big idea, okay? Typically, there's one big idea that you would say in a story. For example, one of the stories that I did that we were talking about integrity, okay? I was talking about telling the truth. And my big idea was you can lose a tooth, but you can't lose the truth. That was the big idea that I kept saying. So that lesson was like, okay, I can obviously lose a tooth. I'm going to, but like the truth is so important. It's so valuable. I don't want to put that under a pillow. I don't want to just get rid of that. I want to make sure that I protect that. So that would be an idea of the lesson. Sometimes if it's not super clear, you want to help them understand what the lesson was and simplify it as much as possible. Now, question number 4. You want to ask about that lesson. You want to ask, is that hard to do? Sometimes the lesson is very much giving an action of don't do this, or you should always be nice, or something like that. For something like you can lose a tooth, but don't lose the truth, you might need to say, okay, and what this means is that we don't want to lie, and then you'd want to ask, now is that hard to do? You'd want to ask them immediately, like, okay, I know you know the lesson, and I know you know what you should or shouldn't do, but is that difficult to do sometimes? Because sometimes kids need to know, like, hey, that's tough sometimes, and that's having a real honest conversation with a kid of saying, like, yeah, that's tricky sometimes, but we can still do it. Okay, but then we go into our next question of, okay, but how do we do it? Okay, if it's difficult, how do I do it? If I'm supposed to lift up a rock, how should I do it? Lift with my back, lift with my knees. I don't even know how you do either of those. But you want to ask that question of, like, okay, but how do we do that? Give really, really specific examples. And then at the very end of that session, you want to pray. And you can go around and you can ask, does anybody have any prayer requests? Does anybody have anything that they want prayer for? And if any kids say something, you can absolutely pray for that. And if nobody says something, you can always ask a kid, hey, does anybody here want to pray? Okay, that gives them a great opportunity to step out and start praying. And if that does happen, you want to make sure you're super encouraging and help them out in the end of that. And the important part during some of those groups, though, is whenever you are praying, though, like, don't, like, completely check out and close your eyes and be like, nobody can, I can't look at anybody. Like, make sure none of your kids, like, ran away. Like, don't close your eyes so tightly for 5 minutes while some kid prays that some nonsense could happen, okay? But those are just some ideas, and we have a few guidelines here that you'll see at the bottom of the sheet that I want to talk through. Okay, don't leave dead space for talking for more than 4 or 5 seconds unless that's part of a game that you're playing. But here's what I mean by that. If you ask a kid a question and you're saying, like, who is in the story? And the kid's just like, you don't want to cut them off immediately, but the longer they take, the more everybody else loses interest, or some kid will jump in. So you want to give it about 4 or 5 seconds of saying, like, okay, bud, do you know? Do you need a hint? Maybe just kind of doing like a check-in follow-up question. Or if not, be like, okay, why don't we ask somebody else if they know? Just an important thing to ask. Now, we have another guideline too. Engage all the kids, not just the talkative ones. You're going to have some kids, again, that are just super talkative, and you want to balance that out. And our last one, talk to the kids. Don't talk at them. There's a very big difference, and it doesn't matter what age group it is, not just 5th graders, but even down to kindergartners and 1st graders and 2nd graders. They can tell whenever you're talking down to them. If I try to lead a group and I try to say to them, like, okay, everybody, now what was the character? Now what did he do? Like, they are immediately going to be able to say, like, okay, bro, like, why are you talking to us like that? Or what is this about? They're immediately going to be able to tell, like, this isn't normally how we hear adults talk, and we're not sure why we're hearing you talk like this, so this is just kind of weird. So talk to them. Now, simplify it. Say it in ways that they can understand, but do not talk at them. Try to talk to them. And these are just some tips to get through small groups, but I believe you can do this, and I believe you're going to be able to change some lives in these groups.